Come along with us as we explore the terrible story of Luz María López, taking you on a terrifying trip into the heart of darkness. With the title, "This Marriage Was the Start of Hell, Luz María López's Case." In this true crime documentary, you will see how a once promising love tale descended into a nightmare of deceit, domestic abuse, and a horrifying crime that shocked Guatemala. A compelling true crime documentary is coming soon that will reveal the horrific details of Luz Maria's life, the deadly twisted love, and the fight for justice in the face of unspeakable misery. Greetings to all. And now we shall examine another heartbreaking instance involving Luz María López. In Guatemala, a nation dealing with a startlingly high rate of crime. When Laria Historian crumbled, she revealed a shift from violent criminality to love. Startling figures show that there are 100 crimes committed every week. According to a 2009 New Yorker article, almost 70% of significant felonies are still unresolved, with half of them falling under the domestic category. Guatemala saw a higher death toll among civilians than the Iraq war zone. This sad story of Luz María López happened in this fascinating yet dangerous country. A pretty young woman named Luz María López serves as the main character of this grim story. After beginning as a promising and romantic tale, it took a tragic turn and ended with her reduced existence to a simple bag of ashes thrown into a sewer. Her tale started as one of romance and promise, but ended with her turning into a pile of ashes. She was the victim of a domestic tyrant, whom she continued to extend forgiveness to over time. Presenting multiple opportunities for reform, this case was clouded by controversy, providing possible avenues for the offender to avoid punishment. Let's carefully work through the specifics. Luz María López at the Queen town of San Cristóbal Verapaz on March 17, 1995. Came from a small family that included Brian López and Amaral. She was the youngest of two children, and when she was a baby, an intestinal blockage almost killed her. Amazingly, a difficult procedure prevented her death, defying the physician's predictions of the odds. Luz María recovered as a result of her mother's constant prayers, and the surgery, which was thankfully performed at such a young age, did not impair her later growth. Lori participated in sports throughout her time in school, especially gymnastics and athletics, where she excelled. She also showed a strong interest in traditional choreography. With ease, she formed friendships with people from different backgrounds, demonstrating her creative soul. Luz María excelled academically, but she also showed a natural talent for a variety of other pursuits. And these humanities, Luz María battled for a better education after finishing school and made the decision to enroll in a prominent state university. She ultimately opted for law, choosing to focus on criminalistics because it had always piqued her sincere interest. A fortuitous meeting. In the Verapaz capital, Luz María went to an automobile showroom with her mother when she was a student. That year, her sister and dad wanted to give her older brother, who had long dreamed of owning a motorcycle, a special gift for his 25th birthday, which was in the showroom. A courteous and quiet perceptive young consultant named Jorge greeted them. He gave some advice and gave the buyers a tour of the entire rasa. After selecting a model, the mother and daughter decided to give it further thought and speak with the family patriarch. As they were leaving, they took the SHP card's business card, and Luz María left her phone number for comments. Soon after, the girl got a call from Jorge, the salon consultant. But the chat was more personal than it was about the impending acquisition. Jorge then called Laria a few more times before he was brave enough to ask her out to a coffee shop. It was clear that he was smitten with the attractive, seductive brunette. It should be mentioned that Lori also found this attractive young man attractive, but he was unsure of how to start their acquaintanceship. Thus, she agreed to meet when he suggested it. Even though the guy was a year her junior, their little age gap did not stand in their way. They fell in love practically right away, and their relationship grew quickly. They both thought they would have a long and happy life together and felt it was true, love at first sight. Despite their parents' objections, the couple, who had been rephrased as virgins, decided to live together after just a few months. Who thought their romance was moving too quickly? The young couple went on to get married about 6 months later for a private wedding. Only those in their closest circle were invited to the wedding. The wedding day presented some intriguing problems since there was a problem with the banquet venue that could have interrupted the celebrations. The couple had to spend a substantial additional sum to guarantee the wedding went according to schedule. Regarding Jorge, the selected companion of Luz María, publicly accessible scanned data about him is accessible. Born in the year 1996 in the municipality of Santa Catalina Ladina, which is situated in the heart of Gray. Growing up with his brother Pablo in a household that lived on the brink of destitution, Jorge was the older of 2 sons. Due to financial limitations, the lads were not treated as luxury. Surprisingly, he had no ambitions for a better life during their early years, putting off pursuing a decent job and shunning intellectual pursuits. Characterized as quiet, uncommunicative, and sporadically hostile, Jorge had trouble controlling his emotions, which affected his ability to interact with others. He committed himself to gaining the love of the lady he thought was his soulmate despite these challenges. After succeeding, he rushed to get married out of concern that his sweetheart would have second thoughts. It's important to remember that Lara's parents had misgivings about Jorge right away. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but there was something about him that made them feel like knees. They were worried, but they could not talk their daughter out of marrying him. After the marriage was tied, things went wrong very soon. The young wife became pregnant, but it was difficult for her to find a good job because she didn't have a university degree. A pregnant woman with no experience was hesitant to be hired by companies, so her only option was to take on irregular, low-paying employment. Her spouse lost his job during this time and didn't seem to be in a rush to get another. After they had a daughter called Alice, the financial hardship grew worse. Both partners were jobless and had difficulty paying for basic needs as well as rental accommodation. Despite Luz María's initial opposition, Jorge suggested a temporary move to his parents' home as a solution since, given their poor situation and the need to support their infant, they had no other choice. Although Luz María's mother, who was aware of their difficulties, kept urging her to go back home, Luz María held out hope that things would get better with Jorge. When Luz María's mother went to visit Jorge's parents one day, she saw something upsetting. Luz María was in a terrible state, living off of very little food and experiencing physical and verbal abuse at the hands of Jorge's younger brother. Jorge did not defend his wife and daughter, who had been persuaded by her mother, even though he saw this happening. At last, Luz María consented to go and went back to her parents' home. Nevertheless, Jorge showed up at their door vowing to locate employment. Only if they could live separately from Jorge's parents did Luz María consent to their reconciliation. Luz María's desire to work for the city prosecutor's office came true after she successfully defended her diploma. Her diligence and hard work paid off as the family's financial condition considerably improved. Who or he continued to be unemployed despite this, depending on Luz María's income. His domineering and jealous behavior strained their bond, and his unwillingness to work added to the friction. Through a difficult marriage with Jorge, who battled to discover his direction and make a contribution to their family life, the story depicts Luz María's churn of tenacity and success. His wife was forbidden by their spouse from creating social media profiles, and he would become upset if she did it while she was by herself at home. It didn't get any better from him. Their relationship would often get strained as a result of his senseless scenes, and Hit said that his wife was to fault for every issue in the household. When Jorge was living at his parents' home, he never stood up for his wife and instead watched helplessly as she was subjected to verbal and occasionally physical abuse from his family. With Luz María as his property, Jorge occasionally used violence against herself and saw nothing wrong with it. Luz María was being physically abused as neighbors heard screams coming from the couple's home regularly. despite her best efforts to flee her violent spouse. Jorge's apologies had a lasting effect on Luz María, who, despite her parents' disapproval, always gave him another shot. Luz María and her daughter sought refuge at her mother's home on December 15, 2020, following a violent incident. Jorge promised that her stability would improve and vowed never to hurt her again, seeming repentant. Midway through January 2021, Luz María, who had regained her trust, went back to their rented flat with him. Jorge's inability to find employment and his stealing of Luz María's salary resulted in financial difficulties, as she stated. With financial support, her mother, who was insensitive to her situation, consented to meet on January 19th. But Luz María didn't show up and stopped answering our calls and messages, which worried us. When Jorge showed up at the prosecutor's office stating there had been a domestic argument, sensing deceit, I filed a missing persons report for Luz María. Jorge was labeled the main and lone suspect in the Isabel Claudina nationwide emergency search, and there was no sign of any adversaries or kidnapping. And Jorge was the last to see her alive, thus it was only inevitable that suspicions would land on him. Even though Jorge denied any involvement, his contradictory remarks cast doubt on his reliability. Specifically, his tardiness in reporting Luz María's disappearance and his lack of attempts to get in touch with her mother raised questions about his involvement in the case. After receiving a report about a clogged storm drain beside the road on January 22nd, municipal workers made this discovery. A sizable plastic bag containing burnt human remains was discovered by workmen when they lifted the grill. The remains belonged to Luz María López, according to forensic experts, who also confirmed this despite the great burn damage. The police were alerted right away. Notably, the building housing Luz María's prosecutor's office was situated on the same street as the horrific discovery. Examining Luz María showed that she had been badly battered, resulting in internal bleeding fractures that she had incurred while still alive, as well as traces of strangling indicated by deep scratches on her neck. Notwithstanding the severe burning of the corpse, the savagery of the crime might be proven by the pathologists. Luz María's parents were able to positively identify her, despite her challenging physical condition. The spouse, Jorge, was detained right away and made the main suspect. The reason for his horrible deed was being looked into. Maria's mother submitted a disturbing audio clip that was delivered in confidence by a neighbor who had seen the couple's regular arguments during the investigation. Luz María's frantic pleas for assistance were captured on tape, offering vital proof of the abusive relationship. The witness did not call the police or step in during the incident, despite the seriousness of the recording. The police were unable to include the anonymous source in the inquiry since they could not be located. Stressed the need for people to report domestic abuse incidents as soon as possible in a public interview, stressing that doing so might save lives. Numerous protests around the nation by thousands of people demanded action in response to the national spotlight case. Evidence against Jorge grew, even though he persisted in denying his involvement. On the day Luz María vanished, Luz María's workplace was visible in the couple's car according to street CCTV. But it was impossible to see the occupants well through the tinted windows. After more examination, the couple's house showed evidence of a crime having been committed there, including drag marks and blood traces. In the family car's trunk, tiny pieces of burned flesh were also discovered. Jorge utilized the double orthopedic mattress he had purchased, together with its thick polyethylene covering, to cover up his wife's burned remains. Neighborhood witnesses claim to have heard Jorge's threats murder his wife and conceal her body for a few days before the murder. The night Luz María was brutally attacked by Jorge in a fit of wrath, which ultimately led to her terrible death. Following an attempt to burn the body, Jorge's horrifying deeds were discovered, resulting in his arrest after a thorough investigation. As we close the chapter on Luz María López's heartbreaking saga, let her story be a stark reminder of the unseen struggles within relationships. Domestic violence should never be silenced, Subscribe for more gripping true crime documentaries that expose the hidden shadows of reality. Join us in spreading awareness and standing against the darkness. Subscribe now and be a part of the movement for change.